The day it all began, I was crawling around the attic looking for a replacement drawer knob. That's the kind of man I am. Other guys discover betrayal on some romantic, windswept cliff or during a screaming match in the rain. Me? I found mine elbow deep in a dusty Tupperware of miscellaneous screws and parts, wondering why I never labeled any of it. I wasn't even supposed to be up there. Maria had been on me for weeks to fix the knob on the hallway cabinet, the one where we keep wrapping paper, expired batteries, and possibly a doorway to a better life. I'd kept putting it off, but that morning, I woke up feeling unusually productive. Like, maybe I'll finally use that gym membership or refinance the mortgage, kind of productive. It lasted about 7 minutes, until I remembered I hadn't paid the gym since February and we don't even have a mortgage. So there I was, grumbling into cobwebs and sweating through a shirt I didn't even like, when I stumbled on a cardboard box marked as stuff, don't bother. Naturally, I bothered. I pried it open expecting to find maybe a tangled mess of string lights or that sad inflatable snowman with the one eye. What I did not expect was an entire miniature village, meticulously arranged, like some kind of festive crime scene. Tiny ceramic people frozen in time, a baker holding bread, a child mid-snowball, a woman staring longingly out of a faux window. But the weirdest part? In the middle of the snowy town square, standing under a lamppost, was a little figurine of a man wearing a blue overcoat. He looked familiar. Not familiar like, oh, that's just how they make those things, but familiar like, why is this tiny ceramic man wearing my glasses and holding a mug that says Frank the Tank? That's when I started laughing. You know the kind of laugh that comes out of you like steam escaping from a pressure cooker? Yeah, that one. Because right next to Mini-Me was another figurine. A woman in a red coat, hand extended toward Mini Frank's shoulder, smiling in a way I hadn't seen on Maria in, well, a long time. She looked nothing like Maria, but I knew it was supposed to be her. I could see it in the pose, the posture, the fact that someone had painted little silver hoops onto the ears. Maria doesn't even wear hoops. Not since Gary. Now, this is where I have to pause for context. Gary is, or was, our neighbor. Lived 2 doors down, sold refurbished jukeboxes for a living, and owned more Hawaiian shirts than anyone not actively on a cruise should legally be allowed to. Harmless guy. Harmless in the way raccoons are harmless until they learn how to open trash bins. About a year ago, Gary moved out. Sold the house to some dentist with a motivational quote wall and a beamer. I thought nothing of it. People move all the time. But now, standing in the attic, staring at that ceramic couple under the street lamp, I realized Gary hadn't just moved. He'd been immortalized in Christmas decor. I stared at the box for a long time. This was not a simple, store-bought decoration. Someone had customized this. And not just anyone, Maria. My wife of 9 years. My partner in life, love, and undercooked Thanksgiving turkeys. She had created a tiny porcelain shrine to her and a man who once tried to convince me that disco was due for a serious comeback. The thing is, I didn't storm down from the attic. I didn't confront her. I didn't even say a word. I just sat there for a while, knees aching, my hands still wrapped around the drawer knob I'd managed to find, while a series of very confusing thoughts rolled through my brain. Like, why the hell is my likeness in a nativity village? Who does that? Is there a crafting underground I don't know about? Eventually, I did go downstairs. Maria was in the living room, sorting through old photo albums. The same ones I swore we'd digitize years ago. She looked up, smiled, and said, "You find the knob?" And I, a grown man holding the key to a mystery he did not ask for, just nodded and said, "Yup, found it." That night, after Maria went to bed early with one of her fake headaches, her term, not mine, I poured myself a drink and opened my laptop. I searched custom Christmas figurines and was quickly ushered into a world of Etsy stores and unhinged crafting forums where people argued about the proper snowflake size for a classy winter diorama. Eventually, I found it. The shop. The exact one that made the figurines. There were reviews. One caught my eye. I wanted to capture the moment he said he'd leave his wife. Now I can relive it every December. I didn't sleep that night. I wasn't upset. Not really. I was curious. I was the kind of curious you get when you find a door in your own house that you're pretty sure wasn't there before. So, like any rational human being, I started investigating. Turns out, Maria had a whole crafting account under the name Snowbell_72. It was all their comments, posts, forums. She didn't use her real name, but the sarcasm was unmistakably hers. One thread in particular stood out. Title: Ever fall for a man with the voice of a jazz DJ and the confidence of a discount Sinatra? I wish I could say I was shocked. I wish I could tell you I cried or yelled or even sighed dramatically. But no. I just bookmarked the thread, poured myself another drink, and chuckled. You know, most men don't get to learn their wife's been cheating via diorama. That's a pretty exclusive club. And I was the newest member. So I did the one thing that made sense. I printed the pictures from her crafting account. All of them. And then I arranged them like a gallery in our guest bathroom. Frame and all. The next morning, Maria walked in and saw them. She didn't say a word. She just stared. And then she went back downstairs and started making eggs like nothing had happened. It wasn't until 2 days later that she brought it up. You changed the decor in the guest bath. Thought I could use some warmth, I said, sipping my coffee. You know, something personal. She didn't speak for a while. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, So what now? I smiled. Now? Now we pretend nothing's wrong for a few weeks until the tension becomes unbearable and someone inevitably says something dramatic during a family dinner. Thanksgiving's next month. Perfect, I said. Give it time to marinate. That was the beginning. Not of the end, exactly, but of the part of the story where things stopped making sense and started getting interesting. And trust me, interesting's better than boring. I spent the next week developing a hobby I never wanted, amateur espionage through suburban mediocrity. Nothing high-tech. No spy cameras or earpieces. Just good old-fashioned lurking and the passive-aggressive superpower of a man who has been married long enough to recognize every twitch of guilt in a partner's left eyebrow. Maria didn't change much in her routine, which told me everything I needed to know. People trying to hide something usually go out of their way to appear normal. She overcompensated, of course. Folded laundry that didn't need folding. Cleaned the garage and pretended to enjoy it. Asked if I wanted to repaint the bathroom. Nothing says, I'm definitely not harboring secrets, like an unprovoked enthusiasm for grout. I didn't ask her anything. That would have made it about confrontation, and frankly, I wasn't in the mood to give her that satisfaction. What I wanted was clarity, and maybe some entertainment. So I started keeping track. Again, nothing dramatic. Just your average suburban dad operation, a little notebook with a drawing of a taco on the front that I'd once bought for grocery lists. It became my logbook. Monday. Maria leaves the house at 3:17 p.m., returns at 5:04 p.m., claims she was dropping off a donation. No bags in car. Tuesday, receives package labeled office supplies, but we haven't had a functioning printer since the Obama administration. By Thursday, I had 5 pages of notes, 0 conclusions, and a renewed appreciation for just how boring my street really was. I live next to the kind of neighbors who alphabetize their garden tools. People who wear tucked-in t-shirts unironically. It's the kind of place where a man wearing sunglasses and a hoodie at the same time is considered a criminal threat. Then came Friday. Maria was getting ready for something. She said she had a committee meeting, which is one of those terms you can't question too hard without sounding like a 1950s husband who thinks anything outside the kitchen is a radical act. She left the house in slacks and a blazer I hadn't seen in a while, possibly because it had been buried beneath 7 cubic feet of unused fitness equipment in the closet. She kissed me on the forehead, a gesture that can only be described as either motherly or vaguely dismissive, and headed out the door. I waited exactly 12 minutes, then followed. Not in the same car. I'm not a fool. I walked. Like a man with nowhere to be and plenty of questions to ask the universe. Maria's car was parked exactly where I expected it, outside the local community center. A beige building that's been mistaken for a DMV more than once and smells faintly of glue sticks and passive resentment. I waited across the street, pretending to check my phone while casually noting everyone who walked in. The first 3 were exactly what you'd expect at a 4 p.m. committee meeting on a Friday, people who wear orthopedic shoes by choice and carry clipboards like they're still fighting the Cold War. Then came a man who didn't belong. Tall, painfully tan, and wearing a button-up shirt with pineapples on it. Not Hawaiian. Pineapples. Like he'd lost a bet with a fruit stand. I didn't think much of it until Maria walked out with him 2 hours later, laughing. Not polite. I work with this guy laughing. Actual laughing. The kind you only do when someone has said something wildly stupid, and you're both in on the joke. I didn't confront her, obviously. I wasn't about to do some dramatic parking lot scene where I jump out from behind a Subaru yelling, aha. That's how you end up on Facebook videos with people narrating your downfall in real time. No. I waited until she got home and said, How was the meeting? She replied, Ugh, boring. Judy won't stop talking about laminating procedures. To be clear, I have never met a man named Judy who wore pineapple shirts and walked with the swagger of someone who owns 3 Bluetooth speakers and a hot tub. The lie didn't bother me. What bothered me was how lazy it was. Laminating procedures? Come on, Maria. At least try. That night, while she was asleep, I went to the community center's website. After digging through a few event pages and PDFs that hadn't been updated since 2014, I found it. A flyer for Neighborhood Developmental Feedback Roundtable. Sounded bland enough. Until I saw the list of speakers. There he was. Dean Matheson. Of course his name was Dean. His bio? Independent contractor, motivational speaker, entrepreneur, and hobbyist drone pilot. Basically, a man who had never worked an honest job but could sell you a dream in 3 different font styles. He looked like someone who owned exactly one blazer and made it work for weddings, funerals, and casual deceit. I started attending the meetings. Not to spy, okay, partly to spy, but mostly to see what kind of man could charm Maria into thinking laminating procedures was a believable cover story. And I've got to say, Dean didn't disappoint. He introduced himself like a man who had never been humbled. Walked into rooms like they owed him money. Made jokes about the grind and pushing the envelope, all while sipping green juice from a thermos that said Live Big. The man was a walking screensaver. He was also, shockingly, fool. Not regular fool. Decorative moron. The kind of moron you put on a shelf and dust occasionally. At one meeting, he gave a 10-minute speech about zoning regulations and somehow used the word synergy 17 times. Maria, for reasons I may never understand, hung on his every word. Nodded thoughtfully. Even took notes. I kept waiting for someone else in the room to realize they were watching a TED Talk from a man who probably thinks TED is an acronym for Totally Excellent Development. Instead, everyone clapped. At the 3rd meeting, I introduced myself. Frank. I'm with the local Home Improvement Concerns Committee. He smiled, shook my hand with the confidence of someone who thought a firm grip was a personality, and said, Dean. Synergy consultant. I nodded. That's not a real job. He laughed. I get that a lot. I bet you do, Dean. Back at home, Maria mentioned him casually at dinner. Dean has some interesting ideas about community engagement. Oh, does he? I said, passing the potatoes. Like what? She hesitated. Just, innovative stuff. Innovative like holding meetings in community centers with no actual agenda? She smiled tightly. You're being negative again. Hard to be positive when your town hall speaker sounds like a TEDx talk filtered through a smoothie blender. She rolled her eyes. We moved on. But I knew then that I was onto something. Not something useful. Not something noble. But something undeniably entertaining. And that, at least, was worth staying in the game for a little while longer. Tuesday started like any other day, quietly suspicious. I woke up before Maria, stared at the ceiling for 6 minutes, and then spent 20 more pretending to scroll through news while actually considering how one might legally fake a midlife reinvention just to mess with someone's expectations. She emerged from the bedroom wearing gym clothes she usually only dusted off when someone from her high school posted a reunion photo. Going to yoga, she said, tying her shoes like she just remembered they existed. Trying a new place. Nice, I said. Try not to pull anything. Except your dignity. She gave me that look. The one that says she's evaluating whether to respond or just save her sarcasm for Dean, who probably thinks yoga is a Scandinavian motorcycle brand. I waved as she left, then stood at the window like a retiree watching for suspicious squirrels. Only instead of squirrels, it was Maria pulling out of the driveway and heading east, which is not where the new yoga studio is. That one's west. But maybe she was taking the scenic route. Or maybe she was finally learning geography by process of betrayal. Now, to be clear, I wasn't going to follow her. I'm not that desperate, and frankly, I didn't feel like putting pants on that early. Instead, I turned my attention to something that had been whispering to me from the edge of logic, the home office. Maria's office was technically a corner of our guest room, which she decorated to look like she worked for a Scandinavian candle brand, despite having a job that mostly involved telling people their grant proposals were too ambitious. I hadn't snooped before, partly out of principle, partly out of fear that I'd stumble on something deeply boring, like tax receipts or inspirational quotes about wellness. What I did not expect to find was the binder. It was neatly labeled, Wellness Program, Personal, in handwriting so careful it probably took a warm-up sheet. Inside was a meticulous catalog of Maria's activities, sleep logs, mood graphs, step counts, hydration goals, all color-coded. One tab was labeled Influence Tracking. That one got my attention. It opened to what can only be described as a relational audit. There were columns, names, dates, emotional impact scores out of 10. There was a section for potential emotional disruption with a pie chart. I'd made the chart, not in the sense that I'd created it. I was the chart. Frank, 32%. Dean, 64%. Remaining 4% was marked miscellaneous social factors. Now, I'm not the most emotionally intuitive man. I once thought our neighbor had died because I hadn't seen her car for a week, only to learn she was just on a cruise. But even I knew that when your wife has reduced you to a chart and your competition to a majority share in her well-being, something's not trending well. But the real treat was under the final tab, labeled simply, Plans. It read like a PowerPoint presentation designed by someone who wanted plausible deniability and also really enjoyed bullet points. Phase 1, Detachment complete. Phase 2, Clarity through exploration ongoing. Phase 3, Resolution and integration pending. It was part therapy worksheet, part political coup. Beneath it was a printed calendar. On the 17th, next to a drawn smiley face with a heart-shaped mouth, it said, Talk with D. I stared at that for a while, wondering if I was being too generous assuming that D stood for Dean and not something metaphorical and pretentious like destiny. I left everything as I found it, no need to tip the queen off, and walked out of the guest room with a curious sense of calm. She was planning something. Maybe an exit. Maybe a performance art piece. Maybe just a really elaborate excuse to buy new workout gear. Whatever it was, I'd just been downgraded to a statistic. And if she thought I was going to respond by spiraling or writing a dramatic journal entry in the garage, she didn't know me very well at all. Instead, I took action in the most frank way possible. I joined her wellness program. That afternoon, I created my own binder. Mine was labeled Frank's Observational Journal of Marital Wellness, Volume 1. Inside were photos I printed from my phone of random things Maria had said were probably fine, but which now looked suspicious. A new tote bag, a sticky note with a phone number in parentheses, a receipt from a store that only sells Scandinavian salad bowls. I created my own emotional impact chart. Maria, 40%. Dean, 50%. 10% was left blank, just in case I developed feelings about my neighbor's new fence. Then I added a new section, Operations. My first plan was titled Operation Subtle Disruption. It involved rearranging things in small but noticeable ways. I moved her vitamins from the kitchen shelf to the third drawer of the bathroom cabinet. I switched the place of her car keys and spare glasses. I put the TV remote upside down and watched her stare at it like it had betrayed her. Maria's confusion was delicious. She didn't say anything, but I could see it in the way she hesitated before opening drawers. Like her own life had developed a draft. On Friday, I left a note on the fridge. Out for personal exploration. Might pick up celery. When I returned, Maria was home, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a slight furrow in her brow. Where'd you go? Just needed some clarity through movement, I said, opening the fridge and pretending to consider pickles I didn't even want. You know, resolution and integration. She looked at me like I'd said something in Morse code. I smiled. I've been reading about wellness. Fascinating stuff. Did you know emotional detachment is considered a growth phase? She closed her laptop. You're being weird. Am I? I said. Or am I finally optimizing my personal performance metrics? That night, she went to bed early. I stayed up reorganizing my binder. I'd added new tabs, her patterns, my responses, and Dean's illusions of relevance. I printed a photo of Dean from the community center's website and wrote, Inflated Influencer, across it in red marker. It wasn't mature, but it was satisfying. By the weekend, I was in full swing. I attended another committee meeting and made a point to ask Dean a very specific question about municipal ordinances regarding light pollution. He blinked 5 times and responded with a story about leadership principles he learned from watching reality TV. I nodded, took a slow sip of my water, and said, Powerful stuff, Dean. Truly paradigm-shifting. Maria didn't look at me once during the meeting, which told me she was absolutely looking at me. The more I leaned in, the more the cracks started showing. She forgot which day she was supposedly meeting a friend. She said that conference thing twice, but couldn't remember which fake conference it was. And when I casually mentioned that I'd love to learn more about clarity through exploration, she dropped her fork. We were officially in the silent chess match portion of whatever this was. She had her binder. I had mine. She had Dean. I had data. And a really solid section on observed inconsistencies. I didn't need to catch her. I didn't even want to. I wanted her to know I knew. Not in some melodramatic way. Just in that slow, simmering, your IKEA catalog lifestyle is under surveillance kind of way. And it was working. By the following Monday, Maria was deeply unsettled by the version of me that had taken up residence in our house, a man with unlimited access to office supplies and unhealthy enthusiasm for structured documentation, and no apparent emotional reaction to being edged out by someone who used the word mindful unironically. She'd started to ask questions. Not about us, of course. That would imply acknowledgement. No, she asked me what I'd been up to in the kind of tone usually reserved for suspicious toddlers and mid-level tax evaders. Oh, just reflecting, I said, tapping a color-coded section in my binder labeled Observe Behavioral Drift, trying to see if any patterns emerge. She stared at the binder like it might hiss. But the real progress came that evening, when I walked into our living room and found Maria on a video call. She didn't hear me at first. She had headphones in and was gesturing at the screen with the kind of exaggerated enthusiasm normally reserved for people trying to make others believe they're interesting. I only caught one line before she noticed me and slammed the laptop shut like it had insulted her. So then I said, "You're the only person I can be real with." To her credit, Maria didn't panic. She smiled as if the sentence I just heard was about her therapist or a cousin in Indiana. "Just catching up with an old coworker," she said. I nodded. Big fan of being real. That's why I've been writing everything down. She went very still, probably recalculating our entire relationship and wondering whether I'd joined a cult. The next day, I received a text from the community center. Reminder, you are scheduled to speak at Thursday's community engagement feedback panel. Now, this was interesting, because I had absolutely not volunteered for anything, unless someone, Maria, perhaps, had suggested I'd be perfect for it. Which meant only one thing. She wanted me busy while something else was going on. Maybe she expected me to be flattered. Or scared. Maybe she thought I'd say no and look like the bad guy for not being involved. But I wasn't going to skip it. In fact, I made a spreadsheet. Thursday evening rolled around, and I put on a shirt I hadn't worn since a friend's kid's birthday party in 2016. Maria glanced at it and asked, "That what you're wearing to speak in front of the board?" "Absolutely," I said. "It's got breathable sleeves. Essential for civic dialogue." The panel was being held in the multi-purpose room, which is code for room with chairs and no budget. Dean was there, of course. Center stage, spinning his pencil like it held the secrets of the universe. Maria sat 3 rows back, smiling like a woman watching her boyfriend do karaoke badly and pretending she's impressed. I took the microphone and began. "My name's Frank. I'm here on behalf of myself, and also the portion of the community that finds unsolicited inspiration deeply irritating." The room chuckled. Dean clapped once, unsure if he was being included or mocked. He was not included. "I'd like to discuss transparency. Not the corporate kind. The regular, neighborly kind. The kind that keeps people from pretending their yoga classes are happening across town when in fact they're at a dry cleaner's storage room with a man named Dean who once described himself as a vibe." Dean's face dropped half an inch. Maria stared at the floor. I smiled. "You see," I continued, "engagement means knowing who you're working with. It means asking why the same 2 people suddenly care so much about zoning amendments in a town where no one even locks their mailboxes." Someone tried to cut me off, but the moderator had clearly lost the will to live and just motioned for me to wrap up. "In conclusion," I said, "if you're going to pretend to be involved in the community, at least pick something interesting, like traffic light conspiracies or underground sprinkler wars. Otherwise, people might start taking notes." That night, Maria didn't speak to me. Not in a silent treatment way. More like she was carefully choosing which version of reality to settle into. I sat on the couch reading a guide on public speaking techniques and highlighting phrases like "own the room" and "make them squirm." Eventually, she said, "You embarrassed me." "No," I said, "I embarrassed him. You just happened to be nearby." She opened her mouth like she was about to say something substantial, then closed it, got up, left the room. Not stormed. Just walked out like she was avoiding a customer service survey. 2 days later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man with an enormous clipboard and a look of confusion. He introduced himself as Wesley, a representative from a lifestyle consultancy group offering trial programs and domestic recalibration. I said, "Did Maria send you?" He checked the sheet. "It says Frank and Maria, strongly recommended." I invited him in. The session was 45 minutes of vague questions like, how do you define happiness in shared space? And when was the last time you truly listened? I answered everyone with the phrase, refer to binder, and offered a copy of my wellness chart. Wesley left looking like a man who would require a meeting with his supervisor. That evening, Maria hovered in the kitchen longer than usual. Finally, she said, I didn't think you'd go along with the panel thing. Oh, Maria, I said. At this point, you should know, if someone hands me a microphone, I'm going to use it. She leaned against the counter. So what? Now you're just going to mock me until I move out? I looked up from my notes. I'm not mocking. I'm documenting. If something funny happens in the process, well, that's a bonus. She didn't respond. Just walked upstairs, slower than usual. Maybe thinking. Maybe not. Maybe calculating how long until she could claim squatter's rights somewhere with better lighting. I stayed downstairs, filing a new tab, community theater, unintentional performances. The way I saw it, the next move was hers. It started with the shelf. Not a symbolic shelf, not a metaphorical shelf, just an actual, physical one. The one above the washing machine that had always tilted slightly to the left like it had unresolved trauma. Maria was in the laundry room, and I only noticed because I passed by and heard the telltale sound of screws being stripped by someone who had too much confidence and not enough patience. I stopped in the hallway and watched her through the doorframe, one hand balancing a cordless drill she clearly hadn't charged in 6 months, the other gripping the edge of the shelf like it owed her money. You good? I asked. She jumped and spun around like I'd caught her smuggling state secrets. I'm fixing this thing. It's been crooked forever. That's the beauty of it, I said. It's our only piece of honest architecture. She stared at the wall. I just wanted to do something productive. Let me know when you hit phase 4. She didn't ask what that meant, which meant she already knew I'd added new phases to the binder. I had. Phase 4, spontaneous domestic guilt projects. Over the next week, our house became a battleground of polite competition. Maria started organizing drawers that had never once requested her attention. She bought bins, labeled them with sharp, pointed handwriting, and lined them up like soldiers. I responded by alphabetizing the garage tools and leaving the label maker in the center like bait. She began playing podcasts about personal development on speaker, as if letting someone else's self-improvement leak through the walls would somehow wash away the evidence. I replied with episodes on negotiation strategies and conflict framing, played just loudly enough for her to hear words like leverage and positioning from the next room. On Wednesday, she rearranged our bookshelf. Every book now faced outward, like we were running a small, extremely unprofitable bookstore. When I asked if she was curating for aesthetic or ideological reasons, she said she just needed a change. I nodded and turned every single one of my own books upside down. She didn't comment, but 2 hours later, she flipped one of them back during a silent pass through the living room. I flipped it again that night. By Friday, it was a game. Then came the key moment. A knock at the door. Harmless enough, until I opened it and saw Dean standing there like a man who had just watched one too many leadership webinars and decided to show up to life uninvited. He held a plastic container and wore a facial expression that screamed, I'm emotionally accessible and probably own a hammock. Hey, Frank, he said, in the voice of someone who thinks everyone likes him more than they do. I brought Maria's USB charger. She left it at the last meeting. Of course, the famous USB charger, easily mistaken for a necessary reason to make contact with a married woman's husband. I took the charger. She'll be thrilled. Our outlet situation has been a little too stable lately. Dean smiled like he wasn't sure if I was joking. Cool. We, got a few more sessions planned. Community involvement stuff. Yeah, I've seen the flyers. Riveting. He did a double thumbs up. The kind of thing only people under 12 or overconfident gym trainers do. Great catching up, man. You say that like we did, I said, and shut the door before he could reply. Maria appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. You didn't need to be rude. You're right, I said. I should have offered him a binder and asked him to rate his visit from 1 to 5 in terms of transparency. She turned away and walked into the kitchen. I followed at a comfortable pace, the way one might follow a mildly suspicious raccoon that's pretending to be a neighbor. I'm guessing he didn't come up with the USB charger story all by himself, I said. Or did he just get that inspired by a wall outlet? Maria was silent. Not the defiant kind. The calculating kind. She opened the drawer where we kept coupons we'd never use and pulled out a rubber band for no reason I could discern. A stress tick, maybe. So, I continued. If this is the part where you make a speech, you might want to keep it short. I have an appointment with my graph. There's no speech, she said. I just think this has gotten weird. Agreed. You had a 6-week affair disguised as a community initiative. I turned into a statistical analyst. We're 2 quips away from hosting a TEDx talk on suburban mutual disengagement. She let out a dry breath. Why didn't you say something earlier? Because if I said it, it'd be real. And I was kind of enjoying the part where you flinched every time I opened a drawer. She didn't laugh, but the corner of her mouth did twitch. A tiny, reluctant acknowledgement. I didn't plan it, she said finally. It wasn't some elaborate scheme. That's even worse, I replied. If it had been a plan, I could at least respect the effort. Maria looked tired in a new way. Not exhausted. More like someone finally realizing that their performance was closing and the critics had been in the audience all along. I don't love him, she said. Glad to hear it, I said. Would have been a real tragedy if you did all this for someone who can't pronounce infrastructure without blinking 3 times. She leaned against the counter. So what now? That was the question. And for once, I didn't have a chart for it. I had spreadsheets, flow maps, observations, and binder tabs. But no next step. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled my chair in slow, like I was negotiating with gravity. I'm not going to ask why, I said. Mostly because I don't think you know. She nodded once. A short, heavy agreement. I'm not going to yell, I continued. I'm not going to toss you out or demand an apology that'll make either of us feel better for 5 minutes. Then what? We figure it out. Or we don't. But we do it like 2 people who know exactly who the other is now. Maria sat down across from me. And if we can't? Then we divide the wellness binders, split the podcast playlists, and agree that laminated zoning reports should never be used as flirting tools again. A pause. Then, can I at least keep the charger? No. That thing's property of community phase 2. It belongs in a museum. The idea came to me while I was changing the batteries in the living room clock, because, as it turns out, betrayal doesn't stop time, but low-grade electronics still try. It hit me with the clarity of someone who's been watching a slow-motion train wreck for months and suddenly realizes he's standing on the tracks with a clipboard. Maria and I needed an exit interview. Not a fight, not a crying session, not a where did we go wrong montage. Just a structured, semi-professional debriefing on the failed joint venture known as our marriage. We tried everything else, passive aggression, binder wars, psychological sabotage disguised as wellness, and none of it had delivered satisfying results. This was the only path left. I scheduled it like a normal person, with a sticky note. Exit interview, Tuesday 7 p.m., living room. Business casual. Bring notes. Maria didn't comment when she saw the note on the bathroom mirror. She did sigh, but it was the kind of sigh that says, of course you'd do this, rather than, I'm surprised. Which felt like progress. Tuesday arrived. I wore a polo shirt and the khakis that had survived 3 rounds of Goodwill purging. Maria showed up in the living room holding her old laptop and a pen that had teeth marks on it, possibly hers, possibly mine from a previous era when stress wasn't managed with spreadsheets. We sat across from each other. I placed 2 bottles of water on the coffee table, not as a gesture of civility, but because it made the room look like a conference. Thanks for coming, I said, flipping open my binder. Maria didn't roll her eyes, which I took as her way of meeting me halfway. Let's begin, I continued, clicking my pen for effect. Item 1. Overall experience. On a scale from accidental Craigslist roommate to synergistic life partner, how would you rate the last 9 years? Maria blinked. Are you serious? Absolutely. This is the part where we pretend we're both emotionally literate adults. She considered it. Somewhere between freelance contractor and employee of the month who stole office supplies. I nodded. Fair. I gave us a 3 out of 5 in long-term compatibility, but a 2 in conflict resolution. We tend to solve problems like it's a group project. Lots of talking, little doing, and someone ends up deleting the shared folder. Maria scribbled something in her notebook. Possibly a grocery list. Possibly a response. I didn't ask. Next, I said. Personal growth. What would you say you've learned from this marriage? That making someone laugh doesn't mean they feel understood. I wrote it down without commenting. What about you? She asked. That using silence as a strategy only works if the other person notices. Maria looked at me then, for real this time. Like she finally understood we weren't just circling each other anymore. Item 3, I said. Future recommendations. Do you believe this arrangement is salvageable with heavy restructuring? Or should we dissolve the company and pursue individual ventures? She hesitated. What if I'm not sure? Then it's time to look at the reports. I slid a folder across the table. It was labeled Postbinder Insights. Inside were 3 sections: observed disconnects, behavioral shifts, and unresolved comments from the kitchen. Maria opened the folder, flipped through the pages slowly. Some made her laugh. One made her snort. Another made her stare just a bit too long. You documented my playlist changes? You shifted from indie folk to upbeat motivational tracks the same week Dean started quoting Steve Jobs. It was either emotional correlation or a coincidence. I took notes. She placed the folder down. You're a disaster. I'm a thorough disaster. Silence sat between us for a while. Not hostile. Just resting its legs. I miss us, Maria said, finally. Not with tears. Just factually. Like noting the printer was jammed again. I miss the idea of us, I replied. But I also don't want to go back to pretending we're fine just because it's easier than starting over. She nodded. So what happens now? We pick an ending. Civil, clean, mutually reviewed. Maybe even signed. And if I said I don't want it to end? Then I'd ask why now. Maria leaned back on the couch. Because it took a binder and a fake panel speech for me to realize you were still paying attention. Well, I said. Nothing like being audited to make a person review their spending. We didn't say anything for a while after that. We just sat. Like 2 people who'd emptied out all the drawers and finally found the receipt they'd been looking for. Eventually, I stood, closed the binder, handed her a copy of the exit notes. I'm going to stay with my brother for a few weeks, I said. Give the house some space to detox. Maria didn't argue, didn't cry, just nodded. Like a person who understands that even if there's still something left, it's not meant to be picked up right away. I packed that night. Not dramatically, not sneakily, just enough to leave room for decision-making. Before I walked out, I left her one more note. Final binder entry. Sometimes the clearest answer is silence with nothing left behind. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel